Hey, what's happening? It's me again, Dave Wakeman. This is the Business of Fun podcast. Thank you for being a listener. Thanks for taking the time to push play on this podcast episode. I'm grateful for you being here. Today's guest just proves that I am on my podcast A game because I have Sabrina Carrazzo. Sabrina is a teacher. She teaches a sports PR class at NYU. She teaches about the science of fandom. She is involved with Harvard, and she works with brands all over the world on their PR strategies. She was a great guest. She's a wonderful person to talk to, and she just proves that, once again, I am on my A+ podcast game. Because the fact that she came on, I feel like is a real coup because you're going to learn so much from Sabrina today. But before I talk about my conversation with Sabrina, I'm going to release this podcast episode on July 1st. That's Monday, July 1st. Tomorrow, Tuesday, July 2nd, I'm in London, and I am going to be hosting a happy hour or a meetup at the Soho Brewdog. From 5 p.m. till whenever we run out of beers to drink and ticket talks to have, I'll be there for at least a couple hours. So I hope to see you there. The link to the location is in the show notes. Also, on September 4th, which is a Wednesday, I will be in New York City, and I will be hosting a brand new reinvented version of the Fans for Life workshop. It's great. It's completely renewed, and it gives me an excuse to be in New York City to see Pearl Jam play at Madison Square Garden. So, total W for Dave is what I'm saying. But it's going to be a great thing for you and your team because we're going to talk about strategy. We're going to talk about branding. We're going to talk about pricing, sales, service, renewals. We're going to pack in a ton of stuff that will help you sell more in 2024 and into 2025. We will go crazy. So make sure you check that out, and I will hope to see you there as well. So back to Sabrina Carrazzo. So Sabrina and Asli Pelit, they invited me to give a guest lecture to their sports PR class in the spring. And I thought, I should have Sabrina on the podcast because it was really nice to get to know her. And I really love the way that she teaches her, not taught, but still teaches her students. She's everything I wish and want to be when I teach a class. She's warm and inviting, knowledgeable, generous with her ideas, wants to really give back. And that comes through in this conversation. We talked about the science of fandom. We talked about her sports PR class. We talked about some of the work she does internationally with Barcelona, Bayern Music, Serie A. We talked about culture and fashion, media and entertainment, tech innovation, pricing, the things that European clubs need to come to the U.S., and why teaching is so important to her. We talked about, women's sports. We talked about, the human piece of sports and business. This is really, like I said, I don't want to oversell it, but at the risk of overselling it, this is a great conversation. Sabrina is a fantastic resource, and I think you're really going to enjoy my conversation with Sabrina Carrazzo on the Business of Fun podcast. I want to welcome Sabrina Carrazzo to the Business of Fun podcast. Sabrina, what's up?
Hey, Dave. How are you? So good to see you.
It is great to see you. I can make a joke because I made it before we started recording that you got all dressed up because you thought we were going to do video, and I never do video. While I am look like I'm beach ready.
No way. You have a collared shirt on. And by the way, I'm only dressed up from my waist up. So below is sweats.
The truth is that I've always only dressed up from the waist up. It's always shorts, usually board shorts. So it's great. So thank you so much for doing this. I had a great opportunity to speak to your NYU sports PR class that you and my buddy Asli teach. It was awesome. So then I was like, I want to have you on the podcast because I thought your experience is so great and the stuff you work on is awesome.
And the way that you teach your students, I thought was amazing. Which, if I'm tooting my own horn, your students, I think, turned around and go, "Oh, like you were like the greatest, the guest speaker." So,
Absolutely.
it's a mutual love thing here. So it's great. And I want to start out because you said one point you made was that you wanted to talk about your science of fandom class because you're like, "What I do the PR stuff, but the fandom stuff is like where you really get excited." And I was like, "That's great," because I taught a whole class for the Kelly School of Business, and it was all Taylor Swift references. So I was like, "Let's do it."
Exactly.
So
Well,
tell me.
Taylor Swift has been quite the force in the NFL. I think everything she touches turns to gold. But in the case of the NFL, I didn't think that even, someone as popular as Taylor Swift could have such a big impact. But as you know, she added over $330 million of brand value to the NFL and the Chiefs. So that is just the perfect example of how leveraging the insights that I've attained over the years in terms of how to engage fans in America could really impact the bottom line for a lot of different brands in sports. So that's why I really enjoy that class, because it allows me and the students to explore a whole range of trends that are impacting the sports and the fan experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was reading an article. What I did is I declared link bankruptcy on like all of my links and tabs that I have open, and I was going through things. But one interesting piece I found was a Billboard Pro article, and it was about jam bands and people trying to learn from the jam bands about fandom. And I think Taylor Swift really fits right in there too. But it's interesting that you brought up the international fandom, or not so much international, but the American fans, because you do a lot of work internationally. Where do you feel like American fans, or not American fans, American teams and organizations could learn from some of these international organizations about how to develop fans better?
Well, actually, I do quite the opposite. So my focus is always on helping European brands. I work with a lot of European football clubs and leagues and international brands to help them understand the American sports experience. That's really where I'm an expert in the U.S. market and U.S. fandom. And so, what I would say is the European teams and clubs experience sport in a very different way. It is super focused on what happens on the pitch and what happens during the game. And data has also played a part in more modern fandom in Europe, in that they're looking at stats as a way to talk about their favorite teams and their favorite players, where in the United States, it's a much more entertainment experience. So fans are not just focused on what happens on the field or in the rink or, on the court, but they really want to know more about the individual athletes and how they spend their time, what interests they have, and they follow that very, very closely. And so that is always a huge opportunity for international brands, but also a big learning experience for them, because they don't operate that way in their home markets. They're super focused on just what happens in the game. And here, you need a better understanding of the pop culture trends that are shaping conversations on social media and driving purchase decisions. And that is how you can tap into the market and really, grow here.
Okay, so that's interesting because you took the question all in a totally different direction, and it was a way that I didn't know. So that's good. So when you're dealing with these European clubs, like what's the thing? I guess what's the barrier to getting them to learn more? Because as you were saying that, I was like the data and the pop culture things. Because I support Tottenham, right? I think we talked about this before, and so I feel like Tottenham has a very Americanized way of like presenting their players. So what's the barrier for other teams not doing that? Like what you like? How do you get people invested in that?
There are two main reasons I've discovered as to why. The first is that, these clubs and leagues, they're the biggest in the world. So, there's one remaining market that they haven't cracked, and that's the American market, right? And of course, they're still working on it. But when you're huge in your home market, when you're huge globally, thinking about the size of the NFL in America, that's how these football clubs and leagues operate in the rest of the world. Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, Central America, South America, their home markets in Europe, they're huge. And so, they're doing things a certain way because the majority of their market, the majority of their fans experience sport in a very similar way. It's just the American market and American fans that are kind of the outlier in terms of their expectation. And so, there is probably a part of it that's like, hey, this product is great everywhere else in the world. We're gonna, like force feed it to Americans, and eventually they'll love it. But I think that they've seen now, because they've been trying to crack this nut since, Pele came over in the 70s, and it still has not happened. So I think that they're more open to learning, and also now there are a lot of American owners across the different leagues, and that's having an influence and an impact. You might have seen that AC Milan has installed courtside seating in San Siro.
The 1899 club, yeah.
That's right. And, that's groundbreaking. That's huge. And it's setting a standard now in Europe where, and I have heard the European clubs that I've worked with, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, talking about going to the Super Bowl and experiencing American sports to learn how American teams do it, and how they infuse this entertainment feel throughout the entire experience for fans. And they want to bring that back to Europe. But I think European executives are a little more hesitant to do it because there's a conservativeness around, you have to understand, you're a Tottenham fan, so you get it to a degree, that football is religion in most of the parts of the world. So if you start changing someone's religion, there's going to be a big backlash in your established markets in terms of how you're doing things. And even if you're only doing them in America, believe me, we live in a global society. Your fans back in your home market see what you do in America, and they make fun of it, or, they really are very hesitant to engage. They don't want their club to engage in any new trends to attract fans in America. So those are the reasons why these clubs have been around for hundreds of years in many cases. And they do things a certain way because that's the way the market expects it. That's the way the fans expect it. But the infusion of American players and American ownership, and also just the need to crack the American nut once and for all, I've seen a big change in openness, from the executives in clubs and leagues to create more of these entertaining experiences, like what AC Milan has just done in San Siro.
Yeah, I feel it happened during, I guess it was 2020, maybe it was like the Super League, or maybe it was 2021. But the Super League was a really good case study for how vicious the fans will turn on a team if they feel like they're doing something that doesn't fit their vision for the club. And people were just like, whoa, hold on a second. And it was a little foreign to Americans. But I think it really highlighted exactly what you're talking about, that religious aspect of the soccer, to their, because it's communities, right? It's like Absolutely. Neighbor versus neighbor. It was weird because when Tottenham played Arsenal just recently, a lot of the Tottenham fans they wanted the Spurs to lose to Man, or Tottenham played Man City, and Arsenal was still competing for the championship, and a lot of fans wanted Tottenham to lose to Man City so that Arsenal would win the championship. And I was like, the only thing comparable to that is Alabama and Auburn. Yeah. I was like, everything else is all BS because it's like so intense.
It is. And, you also see it like if a league or a team, tries to higher prices to a match, you're talking about 1%, 2%, 3%. Fans go absolutely insane. And the prices we pay here in America to, attend the Super Bowl, forget that. I mean, that's super high. But all of the other, regular season games or playoff games, the cost is astronomical. And, if that ever happened in home markets in Europe, I mean, there would be absolute mayhem, as fans just see sport as, religion, as a utility, as a part of the fabric of the culture. And so change is, has to be slow and measured.
Yeah. It's because it's interesting too. It's I forget. It's funny because, I'm sitting at Starbucks here as I'm doing this. Was Howard Schultz on the Supersonics? He called it a public trust. And of course, you saw how that turned out because there's no longer the Supersonics,
yes.
which is a sore point for me. But in Europe, it is definitely a public trust. And it is definitely, if you don't act in a way that upholds that trust, then there's a fan backlash. And that's,
Absolutely.
Again, Tottenham, you saw it with the way they were phasing out the discounts on food and beverage for elderly ticket holders, right? You also see it in a lot of places with the tiered pricing, right? For kids get a better price than adults, which would never happen.
No,
It does
no.
to an extent. Like you can get a good seat. Because I still remember going to Wembley and sitting on like the halfway line, and the ticket my son was like 11 was much cheaper than my wife our ticket. So it's crazy. It's a good context for this thing.
Absolutely.
We're talking about. So on this note, right? We're talking about fandom. We're talking about culture. Those things are all working together. When you're talking with students, right? This is important. How do you help them address it? Because one of the things I think that we both share is we try to give back to the next generation of kids through teaching, right? Because it's important. And one of the things I often struggle with is making sure I'm making my points the right way so that it cuts through, right? Because I don't think I don't think you or Asli get the reputation of being okay boomer. But how do you teach kids about this? Because it seems like it's like a really crazy idea that you're sharing, and it's also I don't think it's one that comes through in a lot of other classes that people get. Because a lot of times to say that like I don't necessarily always appreciate the way people are teaching their students, and they like a little more rote. How do you deal with it? Because I know that this is like teaching is important to you.
Teaching is very important to me for a lot of reasons. I just feel the need to give back to that next generation. And, as we talked about, I think previously, teaching, there are standard ways to teach, and there are certainly great classes where that makes sense. But in the classes that I teach, it's so important that I, lead with real world experience. And that's really what I bring to the table as a teacher is, I've been doing this type of work for 20 years, and I want to teach it to the kids how it is, the real, and I find that gets their attention is, my class is kind of like a real world experiment. And that's what students have said to me. It feels as if, it's so different than every other class that they've taken. In fact, I don't normally teach with a textbook. I teach with links to the most relevant and recent articles, examples and case studies and data that is available, because oftentimes textbooks are too old for the type of work that I'm teaching. Everything that I teach is around what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future. So a textbook from 5-10 years ago is just completely outdated. And so I think I get their attention because I'm talking about today and I'm sharing modern, recent examples of what's happening in the space today. But also, too, the teams and the leagues and the brands that I work with, they are targeting that audience. So, the students in their early 20s, most of them have great disposable income. They have time on their hands to engage in viewing and buying of things that, resonate with them. And so I let them know from the beginning that I care about their perspective and their thoughts. And I really want to hear from them because it helps to inform my work as well. And I take that back to my clients. I have my own little focus group there. And I think that combination of giving them the respect and helping them to understand that, the demographic that they're a part of is important, and I want to hear what they have to say. And then also sharing those modern examples. And we have very, lively conversations around things happening in the industry today. So together, I've had such great students in my class, super smart, super driven, and I just really enjoy the time that I get to spend with them. And I hope and I think that they can feel that. And so it keeps them engaged.
Yeah, that totally tracks. It's one of the easiest sells in the world for like when I'm teaching a class or when I'm going to go do it. It's like, oh, Dave will tell you what it's like to really do the job because he's really doing the job right now. And I think that experience is so great because I know a lot of teachers, like, they might do a consulting thing here or there, but most of it's just like teaching. And so it's like, it is dated, and it's great that like that's your perspective, because so often, and this is another question here, is that we often feel like we have to have all the answers, right? Or people expect that,
Yes.
Sabrina or Dave has all the answers because we've been doing it long enough. And And I teach people, or I try to tell people, I go, I don't know anything. I just know how to go find it. And so like you use
Exactly.
the
It's so
class.
smart. I mean, I teach my 10-year-old son this. So that is, the most important thing to learn really is to find the answers. Because as you say, when you have that sort of ingenuity and you're an entrepreneur at heart where you learn by seeking, there's nothing that you can't accomplish, with the right attitude and the right perspective in terms of going after the information and finding it or creating it if it doesn't exist.
Well, that's 100% certain because your son's learning probably the same lesson my son's learning is like we're two people that really we work out of home offices and we have a global customer base, um,
Yes.
which is like you're going. People go, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I was like, well, listen, I have done projects in New Zealand and I have never been in New Zealand because
Exactly.
there's
I mean, I started
value in
my
it.
business almost 15 years ago and it was unheard of. Now it actually lowered the barrier that, sometimes there would be a stigma if I get on the call with a big global brand and I'm in my home office, pre 2020, pre-pandemic, it could be like, oh, she's not as established as maybe, you should be to work with a brand of that size. But now there is no stigma around it thanks to the pandemic and that but anyway, it never held me back. I've been working from home. I started my business 15 years ago and I always worked from home. That was part of the reason why I wanted to start my own business. I mean, there were so many reasons why I wanted to start my own business, but that was one of them. And it never held me back because I ended up winning, like within a couple of months, a big global brand called Perform Group. They acquired a bunch of new media companies and different brands like the Sporting News and Opta and Goal.com. So, and that really set the stage for the rest of my career and it launched my business, thankfully.
Oh yeah, it's like one client was all they'll take. Mine was Coca-Cola because they had bought
Wow.
Odwalla. And that was great. And like then I was just me, and it was like I was unhireable. It was the thing I said. Like I could never take a job because I was
Yeah.
completely. No, so this is awesome. So knowing that you've had your business now for about 15 years, you have multiple streams of income, just like me. You create all these crazy things. What is primarily when you're working with clients, right? I know it's about fandom, bringing the U.S. perspective to European or global sports teams. Are there like areas of specialization that you focus on specifically, or is it just an overall general thing?
So the specialty area is communications and public relations. So just helping a client to, first of all, understand the market as it relates to their brand, because it's going to be, the way that Barcelona approaches the market, very, very different than the way that Bayern Munich approaches the market and very, very different than the way that Serie A approaches the market. So understanding their unique differentiators, capabilities, brand values, and then applying that to the US market. And, as communicators, we talk about this in terms of messaging and positioning. So helping them to tell their story in a way that will resonate with the audiences that they're trying to reach here in the US market. So doing a lot of that work up front and ongoing. And then, of course, engaging media and conference organizers on their behalf to drive opportunities, as well as engaging with influencers. And, that could be celebrities, it could be US athletes, it could be, media platforms, social media influencers, so that you're allowing cross collaborations to happen, which then in turn drive great messaging and positioning and drive also media relations and speaking engagements. So those are the specialty areas that I focus on with clients. I also have a social media team and we help clients, everything from developing editorial calendars for them, helping them capitalize on trends as they happen, and running their accounts fully as well. But communications, public relations, social media, those are the discipline areas that clients pay me for. And it's helping them to get a better handle on, in order for me to do that work for them, get a better handle on who the American consumer is and who's the fan, underneath. Okay, you want to reach Hispanic American fans, you want to reach female fans. I hear that often. But so then how do you get to the heart of reaching those fans? What do they care about today? And that's where a lot of the work that I do comes in behind the scenes. And then you might see the story in the Wall Street Journal. You might see the story on, ESPN, on SportsCenter. But there was a lot of work that went into driving that particular opportunity.
You brought up the Hispanic and the female right now because both of those are really like topics. Um, both of them have also been things that people have been bringing to me a lot, which I think is kind of funny because I was like, oh, it's something the middle-aged white guy to understand the ladies and Hispanic. And I was like, well, that seems wrong, but that's okay. I think I tell people, like you said,
you can figure it out, right?
I can figure it out, right? Yeah, it's that humility that gets me places, right? How, what are some of the changes and what are some of the things that people are doing around female fandom? Because I know it's hot right now, and I know a lot of people will be interested to hear, a different perspective on it. Because I've always been like, what these female sports just need more investment because they're just suffering from a lack of investment because 54% of the global population is female. So if you can't make something of that, like what,
exactly,
you got to be an idiot. And I say, use greed. Don't even do it because it's the right thing. Just be greedy because they have money to spend. But I'm curious from your perspective, what does that look like and what does that mean?
Such a great question, Dave. And I really, truly try to focus as much as my time on driving interest in women's sports as I can, in supporting female executives and elevating them in the industry. So, I mean, from the very high level, there's just a problem with women being respected, period. Women being respected in workplaces, women being respected as athletes, women being respected at home. And, there's a certain characteristic that women have, being caring, being humble, feeling like they need to be overqualified for things in order to get the benefit of it, just, too humble. And that has held us back in a lot of regards. And also, too, our focus on being caregivers, which I don't think should be seen in any regard as a negative or something to hold us back. If you're a caregiver, you're contributing to our society in the highest form, and that should be celebrated and appreciated, just as we do with military who protect our borders and who protect us. Women and, whoever it is, caregivers now more and more are becoming men, but the caregiver plays a vital role in our industry. And for so long, women, female athletes have been held back because of this feeling that as soon as I have a child, my career is over. And it was a very real thing. And big brands have, dropped female athletes for that. But, I have been representing Barcelona's women's team since 2018, really since they started putting a lot of money into promoting the team, way before following women's sports became a social movement and now became a great business opportunity. And I have seen how difficult it was in those early days to get a single media to write a story about this incredible women's team. And being on the front lines of that, having great relationships with these media folks across all the top media that cover sports, that cover women's sports. And there was very few back then in 2018, but it was mostly going after the media that cover men's sports and asking them to do a story on a female team. And it was very, very, very difficult. And then a bunch of research came to light that explained it. And that was that, for many, many years, only 4% of all media coverage was focused on women's sports. And so it's very, very difficult to drive engagement, to drive viewership, to drive monetization when there isn't the promotion happening, when there isn't the access having to the interesting storylines to bring fans in. And so that held us back. That held back women's sports for a lot of years. And the outcry over it, people stepping up and doing this type of research and putting it out there and putting it in the mouths of the right people who have these big platforms, athletes, female athletes, but also male athletes, to give a voice to the struggle that was happening. And what then came to light was, despite the fact that all of the national media that exists only covers women's sports 4%, you're still seeing tremendous viewership, much bigger viewership than a lot of the male sports. MLB and NHL, we're seeing a lot less viewership and engagement on social media than women's softball, than women's swimming. Certainly tennis, we already know, was huge, and thanks to the great work of Billie Jean King all those years ago, there is more equality in tennis. But in all the other sports, where you can't find media coverage of these women. You can't find the actual games. Where are they? Where do they exist? But they're still pulling in more viewers and more engagement than some of the men's sports that you can just turn on ESPN and watch. So that was very telling, and giving access and giving those data points to the women with the voices and the platforms, really made it clear, hey, there's a big problem here because we do have viewership, we do have engagement, despite the lack of media coverage, despite the lack of media rights deals that provide this content to female fans who are interested, we still have more viewers. And so more and more of that type of conversation put pressure on the media companies. And now we're in the place where media is covering women's sports. And you can find, the WNBA and women's soccer and, tennis, all of those sports, you're seeing much more, content around on all the traditional platforms. And now with the emergence of all these female focused platforms, Just Women's Sports, Bleacher Reports highlight her, The Gist, She's a Baller. There are many of them that that have developed over the last few years, specifically to promote women's sports. And now we're at the point where brands need to step up. And, the company, the broadcasters who buy media rights, they need to step up and pay the women's game what it's worth, because that, is really the last step that we need. Now we're seeing, we already see a lot more media coverage in traditional media. We have media outlets focus on women's sports. So the access now is there to the storytelling and having insight into where to find these games. And now we just really need the broadcasters and the brands to pay the money that the game is worth. And you're seeing that. It is starting to happen now because of the activism that has happened. But every time activism happens, the beginning stages are always very difficult on those people who speak out, because you're the troublemaker. You're seen as a troublemaker because you're talking about something that is important and you're highlighting something that maybe not everyone understands or sees. And so you have to always go through the fire. And thank God for people like Megan Rapinoe and, Barcelona, I would say, on the European front with football, stepping up in a big way. Just Women's Sports, they're very outspoken about, and together, Alex Morgan's media company, they have been very vocal in bringing attention to the plight of female athletes in women's sports. And with that came the public support. And now with that is coming the support of the brands and the broadcasters. So I've seen a huge change over the last, what has it been, 6 years in terms of the growth of women's sports. And I think we're only just hitting the baseline. There's still so much growth that will come over these next 5 years.
Oh yeah, I was always a troublemaker because in 2015, I went and looked it up. I wrote a thing about the only thing holding the WNBA back was marketing investment, which of course, that's sort of the story of a lot of my sports biz career is I'm the one who's fighting the way through, going, look, there's opportunity, but you got to be willing to go look for it. It's not just going to fall in your lap.
Exactly.
If you get there first, you can win. And, some of these brands and some of these things that are just specifically dedicated to women's sports, like the sports bra, these things are awesome, right? It's just why, it's the same thing for any different group. It's why would you expect that just white males are the only point of view that you need to focus on, or that's where the only opportunity is within the dominant.
But sports is a microcosm of society. And, just going back to the first point that I made, women are constantly undervalued and disrespected in every industry, in every corner of society. And so sports is just a reflection of that, similar to racism in our society and how that filters into sport. So there's much more work that needs to be done to ensure our future generations are being more cognizant of where this exists, because it's so ingrained in our society that often we don't even realize the things that we're saying and the things that we're doing, how discriminatory they are, because it's just all that we know. And so to question, this is what I say to my classes, and that's why I really so enjoy teaching at NYU, teaching our future leaders, men and women, because I always have at least one or two classes about this, and that question everything around you. Don't just assume that the things that you're saying, the things that you're doing are the way that they should continue to be done and the way that you should continue to talk about things. Question everything, understand the origin of things, because people will ask me all the time, if I'm having conversations and this comes up, and you can see how it just, it triggers me, and I, in a good way, and that I want to have a conversation about it. And, I often get asked, well, you're so successful. It doesn't seem like you've ever experienced, a discrimination as a woman. And I'm like, no, I've been successful despite that, because I understand and I don't hold it against people. It's a matter of holding people accountable, but also doing it in a positive way where people can learn from the experience, because they don't really know. There recently, just an anecdote, a really interesting story. I was having a conversation with a very, junior person in the industry, and we work together, and she said to me that I have a very strong personality. And in a way, of course I do. I'm a business owner. I've had my own business for 15 years. I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I teach at NYU. I'm a part of Harvard University's Global Sports Initiative. So I took that as, almost derogatory, that, I don't have a big personality, but I do have a lot of knowledge, and I'm absolutely willing to use my platform and my voice to share that knowledge with people. And so I took the opportunity to explain to her that, think about the use of that around, powerful, experienced women, because what you're doing as a woman yourself is you're downplaying, someone's experience and someone's knowledge. I don't have a big personality. Maybe I do, but like, that's a derogatory thing to say to a woman who has 20 plus years of experience and incredible experience at that. You want me to be a wallflower, and that's never going to be me, right? And it's a similar thing that like Megan Rapinoe had to deal with, right? A lot of backlash. Or Serena Williams. Women are associated with certain qualities of being quiet and nurturing and humble. And when you're more, outspoken, when you're knowledgeable and you share that knowledge and experience, it's like, whoa, we are not used to a woman, being so forthright like this. And it's, just having that conversation with the next generation of like, think before you say that to a senior executive who's a female. You would never say that to a male executive, right? That they have a big personality, because you expect them to have a voice. So it's things like that really just irk me, but also I try to use them as a learning experience, because she didn't know. She was unaware of the connotation around telling a woman who's 20 years her senior that she has a big personality.
That's like sort of the issue is like you just sort of, it's all around you, so you never actually recognize like how it's like it's seeping into you, and how you said question everything, and I go, the challenge I'm always like grappling with people is like, this is the way things have always been done. Like, that's the only way you can do things. What's the insanity thing is like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It's like change means change, and sometimes that means like this is wholesale change. So like, and what you're I think teaching kids is like, listen, think there's going to be ingrained structures that you're dealing with, and there's going to be ways that people have been doing things for decades, and it's led them to be successful. What got them there is not necessarily what's going to get you to where you're going. So you have to be respectful, right? But you also have to understand that like you have to push for change. You have to be the one who's fighting for change, right? And it's, I think, such an important lesson, because especially in the States, when I'm teaching kids, it's like they're being taught that like, well, you just fit into this cookie cutter thing and you'll be all right. And I'm like, well, it's not true, right? Because if you do that, then like it's going to be heavily weighted towards white dudes, right? I get in trouble for this all the time. It's not set up for women. It's not set up for kids who are like Asian kids. It's set up for black kids, right? And so you have to be a little bit more. You have to be bold sometimes, right? If you know something
Absolutely.
and you have an idea, you have to use it, right? And I was like, I think it's the way I grew up in my background that has led me to be like, hey, look, there's lots of women who know really, really great stuff. It doesn't mean that they're challenging me as a white man. It just means they have a different set of experiences that are just as valuable and just as important. They're just different, right? It's not better or worse. It's different. And that's like, I think the thing I love about what you teach your students and what you bring to everybody you work with is that perspective. It's not better or worse. It's just different. And like the different thing is what makes everything awesome. Or unless
I
I'm
love that, Dave.
something.
Yeah, I talk about this all the time because, growing up in Queens, New York, it's literally the most diverse place in the world. And I had the opportunity to grow up around people who were wealthy, people who were poor, people from every nationality and background. And I have such an appreciation for the human, whoever that person is in front of me. And I find that that's a difficult thing, more difficult than like that's probably been the most shocking thing for me as an, executive as I go up and I learn more as a leader, how challenging it is for others in our society to accept people for who they are, as they are, the good, the bad, and everything in between. It's like there are learning moments for all of us, and just accept people for who they are today and help each other as much as we can. That is one of the most difficult things that I grapple with, is how much judgment there is around, especially women, of course, because women are expected to be a very certain way. There's a very tight circle of expectations that women in particular have to fit into. That's been super challenging for me, because I'm always, kicking those boxes open. There's no way I'm going to be in a box ever. But also just, being on the inside as a white person and hearing sometimes conversations about people of color, or, being in a room full of men and hearing the behind the scenes of how they talk about women's sports, things like that, where it's a fad, right? It's not something that's a long-term growth opportunity, but it's a fad for right now. So it's so challenging, or also just all the experiences when you're working in a multicultural team that people don't understand each other. For me, that always just came naturally. And I feel like as a leader today, if someone is ascending that ladder, if someone has the goal to be a leader, they really have to have a very good understanding of people and culture and differences, because that's more and more crucial in terms of being able to manage people, is understanding who they are, what motivates them, what triggers them, and being the type of leader who can support their growth and nurture them while also pushing them to be the best that they can be in a respectful way. Where leaders of the past, the way that I came up in the industry was like, no one gave a crap about what I wanted or what I was interested in, what my background was. It was like, I had to fit in order to make this work. I had to figure it out as the employee. And my bosses were very tough on me. My bosses cursed at me sometimes. I mean, it was wild, wild west back then. And like the employee just had to deal with it. Now it's the reverse. And employees have so many, advantages and expectations. So if you want to grow your business by leveraging employees, you have to figure out how to really work with people in a better way, in a more human way.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely right. Some of this brutal stuff that I had to deal with when I was starting out, and forget the low pay, which was like how
Right.
because like for the kids, I'm glad, like in some ways it's better. I still know it's like really hard, but it's that human thing, right? It's I've been lucky. It's like I just really love people, so then I'm very curious about
I
the
could see that.
perspectives they bring and the way that they, and I feel that maybe that's a strength I bring, but it's so great because somebody has a shared vision of that and a shared like belief in that, because I think that's it's super important. It's not always present, and it does bring, it allows you to bring a unique skill set, a unique perspective to your clients and your class, and just to the industry as a whole. But I don't want to keep you too long because I know we both have kids we got to deal with here. How can people find you, Sabrina?
The best way to find me is probably on LinkedIn, Sabrina Carrazzo. Find me there. I also have my PR agency website, sabrinacomms.com. And there you can find more about me, my team. I have an amazing team that I work with, and some of the work that we've done with football clubs, with technology startups, and with venture capitalists. So I really do love the work that I do. And hopefully that comes across in the way that I talk about it. And certainly I know that we connected because of that. You love what you do. I love what I do. And there's honestly nothing better than to work on projects that excite you and that you feel are, changing the world to make it a better place. And I'm lucky that I get to do what I do and meet people like you. So thanks for having me. And I look forward to staying in touch, Dave.
I'll talk to you soon.
Tell me what you thought of my conversation with Sabrina Carrazzo by sending me an email at my name, davidwakeman.com. Check out my website. It's davewakeman.com. Remember, if you listen to this before 5 o'clock in London on July 2nd, we are going to have a little meetup, a little Talking Tickets Business of Fun meetup at the Brewdog in Soho at 5 p.m. The link to the location is in the show notes. I think it's 21 Poland Street, but just so I don't screw it up, I put the link in the show notes. Make sure you check out the Fans for Life workshop on September 4th, 2024 in New York City. Conveniently coincides with me needing to go to New York for a concert at Madison Square Garden, but that's the beauty of this whole thing. My need is your benefit. And we are going to cover just tons and tons of great stuff, completely renewed, to focus on strategy and branding and pricing, sales, probably work in some of the stuff I've learned about prospecting and using creative ideas to get your foot in the door with people. We're going to cover a whole lot of stuff. It's going to be great. That link is in the show notes as well. Make sure... Actually, I already told you. Make sure you email me and tell me what you think. But thank you for being here. Forget everything else about me. Thank you for being here. As I say every time I record these things for I don't even know how long now, I couldn't do this without you. I'm so grateful for your time and your attention of listening to the podcast. If you know someone who would benefit from this conversation, maybe the one I had with Jason Velez last week, make sure you forward this along. Do me a solid. Rate and review the podcast. It helps me get better guests. It helps people find me. It helps me continue to be able to give you good ideas and good conversations that you can hopefully put to use in your organization, with your team, in your business. Okay? And thank you so much for being here. Until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Take it easy.